It's time for the Friday Night Roundtable featuring a newsmaker interview with Dean Martin. Mr. Martin is the treasurer of the state of Arizona. Joining me on the Friday Night Roundtable, Jim Ninsel, the Tucson Weekly. Sarah Garrett Gasson is with us from the Arizona Daily Star, and Linda Valdez of the Arizona Republic. Treasurer Martin, good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I guess you got some good news this week with the leaseback agreement of, what, $735 million for the state of Arizona.
Looks like the state will be able to pay bills in February, so we're glad to see that. I mean, I didn't like them doing the wholesale leaseback from the beginning, but at this point the state was basically broke. They didn't have a choice. So fortunately that sale went through, so we'll be able to pay bills. Including
bills that were kind of past due to the University of Arizona and the other
including
universities.
Including university payments. When we were ending 2009, we were getting so close to our credit limits. We've got about $1.2 billion that we're able to borrow to keep the lights on. We were going to get very close to that, so the governor had essentially instituted slow pay until this occurred and slow down all payments, including the universities. Now that the sale's gone through, as soon as that gets funded, I'm sure you'll see the university payments and other payments start to move a little quicker.
Elliot Pollack is the economist hired by the House Republicans to write an economic development plan. He told the Arizona Republic that he doesn't see how we're going to get through this without some sort of short-term tax increase. And he also said that a tax increase, sales tax increase like the governor's talking about, would not hurt Arizona's recovery. How do you still oppose that when we're in such tough economic times?
Well, first of all, we don't need temporary solutions. It's partly how we got into this mess was temporary solutions, and there's no such thing as a temporary tax to begin with. What I have been talking about for the last 3 years is dealing with Prop 204. Now the governor's picked up on a portion of this now, and I'm glad to see that happening. What I think we ought to do is re-refer Prop 204 to the voters, and this time give them a transparent choice. Option A, this is how much tobacco brings in, this is what you have to reduce benefits to for it to be self-sufficient as it was originally advertised. Or option B, if you want to keep the benefits where they are, this is what it would take in a permanent levy in order to cover that. Give the voters the option one way or another to solve this problem. Just putting a temporary tax in place, all that does is it doesn't even get us through this cycle. It only covers about a third of the problem. It's not the permanent solution we need. We have to either permanently reduce spending or permanently provide new revenues. Either way, we're going to be right back in the cycle the next time there's a recession.
You've announced this week you do want to run for governor. If you were to reduce that health care benefit, how much money do you see that saving?
Right now, the estimates are nearly $1 billion. We're still diving through the most recent numbers. We're waiting for the governor to release her budget because that's when we get all the actual patient data, caseload growth data, and everything else. But right now, it's somewhere between $600 to $900 million, potentially, depending on how you package that.
So that's still nowhere near the gap either. So how do you solve this problem?
Well, it's the largest single uncontrolled cost that we have. Other than that, what we have to do is basically the state's living paycheck to paycheck. We've got revenue coming in at roughly 2004 levels. Essentially, what we need to do is go back to an 05 baseline. Now, I'm not saying you adopt the 05 budget, but that's what we can afford right now. So that's your starting point. Anything you want to increase over 05, somebody else has to go below that. But start at a baseline that you can afford and build from there, as opposed to trying to go where you are now. And it would be impossible to cut your way back from this point. The political process takes too long.
And your education spending is also formula controlled, so you can't go back to that level, can you?
Well, you can, and this is the interesting thing. And what we're looking at is the maintenance of effort requirements. The state's actually exceeding the federal maintenance of efforts requirements. They've not even gone back to what the minimum is the feds require. And the federal government has also said that you can ask for a waiver, and as long as you're spending the same percentage of your budget that you were in 2006, that's okay. You don't have to actually spend the same dollar amount. Those are the types of things that you're going to have to do in order to balance this budget. Otherwise, there just isn't enough money to go around.
You're listed on the American for Tax Reform's website as having signed the taxpayer pledge.
Yes.
Is that still the case?
That's true.
I'm just wondering, should you be elected to the governorship, are you willing to reconsider that should you be elected governor, given the extreme dire budget crisis we're in?
Well, our voters have been, and our taxpayers have been hit really hard in this recession, and I have a really difficult time of putting the burden back on them for what's happened over the last several years, where the states continue to grow its budget by double digits, while the recession has reduced revenues by double digits. Now, some of this problem is due to the economy, but more than half of it's due to self-imposed restrictions, or just ignoring what's been going on with the economy and continuing to pretend like there was no recession. To shift the burden back on the taxpayers at this point, I think would be counterproductive, and I actually do think it would prolong the recession. We've seen in the past, whenever you raise taxes, people tend to buy before the tax goes up and not buy for a while afterwards, and that actually spike and then crash will actually prolong the recession rather than help us get out of it sooner.
You have said if things get really bad that IOUs would have to be issued to state workers. In this country, from what I understand, if you work, the courts have said you will be paid promptly. California tried to do the IOUs to state workers, but I think the court said no over there. Why would it work here?
It wouldn't work. It would be devastating from an economic perspective. I mean, set aside the federal statutes for a moment. I mean, just the ripple effect of the largest employer in Arizona not paying its employees. Basically, if the state continues to write checks once the money's gone, it's basically first come, first served. The way the statutes in Arizona are written, if they present checks to the bank and the bank doesn't have the money to pay them, we have to basically bounce them and give them an IOU instead. We have been talking about what's the mechanics of bouncing checks. It hasn't been done since the Great Depression. And to some degree, at the very beginning, we can help kind of plan for that, as strange as that sounds, and try to only bounce those checks of those who can maybe afford it. That's where the governor decided to slow down the university payments. But not that you can really afford it, but that was the decision. If this continues, what I worry about is if you do a large K-12 rollover, which it looks like they're going to do $1 billion this year, we start off the next year with only a couple $100 million in the bank. You pay $1 billion in rollover payments. You're right at the edge. And once you're out of money, I mean, there's no money to pay bills, and that includes employees. You may have a federal lawsuit, but how do you get money from a stone?
You're running your election for governor as a clean elections candidate, even though you've opposed that in the past. You've criticized it. You're part of a court challenge, but you've said this is your only choice because traditional candidates can't win. There's been a lot of criticism of that as bending principle when it's convenient. How do you respond to that?
Well, from day one, when I first filed the lawsuit, I said the system's punitive and coercive. It punishes those who don't use it, and it's coercive, trying to force you down that system. In the history of the state, since this system was put into place, no one has successfully run for governor without using the system. And so,
but there are those who are running without clean elections.
There are those who are running